did one regular.
Okay.
The Columbus Metropolitan Club was founded in 1976 by 13 women leaders who wanted to be included in the community conversation. I am Sally Bloomfield, and I was one of those 13 women. Having been left out of men's clubs that focused on community issues, it was a priority for us to make the club 100% inclusive.
Today, CMC presents public policy forums every Wednesday at lunch with average attendance of more than 200 people. I'm Tony Bell, and I frequently attend forums, which are open to everyone and present relevant, current, and newsworthy topics. I'm grateful that CMC is nonpartisan and presents many perspectives on every topic.
I'm Jane Scott, President and CEO of the Columbus Metropolitan Club. CMC is open to everyone. We invite you to explore the personal and professional benefits awaiting you at the Metropolitan Club. Welcome to CMC.
Welcome to CMC.
Welcome to CMC.
Welcome to CMC.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. Founded in 1976 by 13 visionary women leaders, CMC's mission is to connect people and ideas through community conversation. From its beginnings, CMC has welcomed everyone. I'm Niele Juris, Senior Director of Communications and Engagement at the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. You all know us as MORPC. I'm also a member of the CMC Board of Trustees. Let's begin by meeting our newest CMC members. Nicole Callum with PNC, Ron Ernst with Leadership Horizons, Jeffrey Field with Geosite, Jennifer Fleming with the City of Columbus Department of Development, Jordan Fromm with VRG Companies, Julian Garrett with the Boys and Girls Club of Central Ohio, Brian Hendrickson and Courtney Whetstone with the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, John Hollins with Gabbin Communications, Sloan Spalding with the City of New Albany, Danielle Stagg with Nationwide, Valencia Turner with Franklin County Children's Services, and Karen Hughes. Let's all welcome them. Welcome to CMC. If you're not already a CMC member, please join. It's easy to do through CMC's website. Please also take a moment to look at the back of your forum programs or flyers. You'll see the organizations that provide for not-for-profit Columbus Metropolitan Club with half of its annual revenue. To join the list of generous sponsors, please see Jane Scott or Lainey Colbert with CMC. Thank you to today's sponsors, the Robert Weiler Company and Regionomics. Today's live stream is presented by the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch. Let's thank all of those supporting today's forum. Okay. Between 2010 and 2020, every Columbus community reported growth. On average, Franklin County gained 44 residents a day. Another way to look at this growth is that nearly every year, Columbus adds the equivalent in population of a new Bexley. There aren't just more people in Columbus either. There are more people in greater diversity too. Today, we'll unpack Columbus's population growth and growing diversity over the last decade, along with the implications for businesses and organizations. So please welcome today's speakers, Michael Wilkos, Senior Vice President of Community Impact with the United Way of Central Ohio, our host, Autumn Glover, Senior Director of Community Health Partnerships with Ohio Health. You can learn more about today's speakers again in your forum flyer. To begin our forum, we would like to welcome Michael Wilkos to the podium to provide us with an overview of today's topic. Michael, the podium is all yours.
Good afternoon. I first have to acknowledge my fashion choice for the day. If you didn't see my shirt, it says, "Warning, may start talking about Columbus." I found this shirt online. I did not have it made, and I wondered when I pressed the order button Did they actually have to make it in my size, or was there an inventory of this shirt? Because I'm not really sure what the market is for such a t-shirt. But it's really an honor for me to be here with all of you today to talk about the city that I love. So let's talk about Columbus. It has long been a city that is looking for an identity. Yes, we are a capital city, but historically we've been rather benign to that role. It seems that most of us really focus on what's happening locally. And sure, we're a college town too, but we seem to only now be awakening to that potential beyond football. Some of us see ourselves as a banking hub, an insurance town, a fashion center. But most of us wouldn't start with those things if we were describing our city. We are suburban, we're new, we're changing. We have been a test market city. The gas station, ATM, and cable television were either born here or perfected here. We're a fast food town, donuts, pizza, sliders, burritos, and combo meals. Scented candles, women's intimates, and body washes are also from here. We're not a visitor mecca, and we never will be. Maybe in the not too distant future, we will be known as the Silicon Heartland. We are not the Motor City, a Steel City, a city of brotherly love, a Queen City. We're not a Mile High or windy. We don't have a Big Easy or a Big Apple. We're not even a mistake on the lake. Most people don't even know that we're on a river, let alone the name of it. And by the way, the Scioto River means hairy river. That's why we have those really cool deer sculptures by artist Harry Allen near Kosai, which are paying homage to the fact that there would always be this thin layer of deer fur on the river in the spring. And along those lines, we should maybe all start to follow the leadership of the YWCA of Central Ohio, who is an anti-racist agency. They acknowledge that we stand on the stolen land of the Kaskaskia, Shawandesi-Tula, Miamia, and Hopewell. If we could create a current and maybe accurate nickname, maybe we should be called the Big Blank Stare, because that's typically what you get when you tell people you're from Columbus, Ohio. And then after that, you normally get this, oh, you're from Ohio. Sorry, right? So, in 1978, Columbus Monthly published a lengthy piece about our inferiority complex. It covered all those usual topics: sports, culture, fashion, politics, housing, and more. The article concluded that, well, we're kind of a blah city, nothing really remarkable. If there was anything that made Columbus unique, the article claimed it was the absence of negative things that so many struggling cities in the 1970s were indicative of, particularly cities in Ohio. And unfortunately, this urban bleakness of Ohio cities in the 1970s is still mostly true 50 years later, as almost every single city in Ohio has consistently been losing people since. Ohio leads the nation in the most cities losing people. We don't seem to have a state legislature that likes cities or the people who inhabit them. In the race for urban decline, Ohio seems to be a clear favorite to win that race. One respondent in the 1978 article who travels extensively said, "I love my time in Columbus. I know that I can stay home in the evenings and know I'm not missing a thing." So despite the humor, right, the overarching theme in the article was for all of the missing things people thought Columbus didn't have, there was this sense that Columbus's better days are ahead of itself. And if you grew up somewhere else in Ohio and you live here now, you still believe that is true. Our better days are ahead of us. Since that article was written 44 years ago, Columbus has moved up 5 notches from 19th place to the 14th largest U.S. city. We have never been larger, we've never been more diverse, and we've never been more influential. And despite our incredible growth, some historical patterns continue to be true. We are a segregated city, economically and racially. Some neighborhoods thrive, others struggle. The census revealed it was the largest numeric increase in population growth in Columbus history. It was the second largest population growth for Franklin County. All of the net growth of Columbus and Franklin County is due to increases in diversity. The white population is declining. The black population is up 21%. The Asian and Hispanic populations are both up 64%. Those who identify as other, up 80%, and those who identify as two or more races is up 168%. We are not the same place we were even in 2010. If you do not have a strong DE&I platform in your business, in your organization, in your place of worship, in your neighborhood, you're not just behind on where we're going, you're behind on where we are. If you look at us as a region, half of our growth is due to more babies minus deaths. 25% of our growth is due to international immigration, and another 25% is due to domestic migration, which almost entirely comes from within Ohio. When you move from our region, you generally leave Ohio and you leave the Midwest. Sun, water, mountains, and warmth are attractive qualities Columbus cannot compete with. We are the most diverse county in the state, and we are changing incredibly fast. If current trends continue, Franklin County will not have a racial majority at the end of this decade. 183,000 of us speak a language other than English at home. That's 40,000 more people than live in the entire city of Dayton. None of my grandparents were born in the United States. My mother never became a U.S. citizen. At some point, I hope indigenous people, non-indigenous people, will stop attacking non-indigenous people for being non-indigenous. We have more kids and fewer seniors than any other urban county in the state. But children born here do not start life equally based on the neighborhood in which they are born or continue to live, or simply based on the color of their skin. Our poverty rate is staying stubbornly high at 15.4%. That's 200,000 people in Franklin County experiencing poverty, and another 200,000 are working poor. Black and Hispanic residents experience poverty at 300% the rate for whites. Every part of Franklin County is more diverse. Diverse populations are moving outward. The white population is moving inward. And despite these changes, we actually have a long way to go before we are an equitable region. Autumn and I love talking about Columbus. We both have studied urban planning. We both come from industrial Ohio. She from Toledo, I'm from Youngstown. And we came to Columbus for opportunity, and we stayed. We hope to bring us to a common understanding in the ways in which Central Ohio is changing and what it means to all of us. We are at a crossroads, and we have some big decisions to make as a city, so let's get to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Excuse me. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. As Michael noted, we're friends. We're all friends in this room. This will feel like a conversation amongst friends. The census and the data that Michael highlighted today, there are lots of things we can pull from it. The goal of the discussion today is for us to pull out some themes for us to think about where do we go next. So let's jump right into it. So Michael, you alluded to the fact that I grew up in Toledo. Any Toledo people? Very proud to be from Toledo, that's right. And you're from Youngstown. So let's start with the journey. I ended up in Columbus because of Ohio State and recruited my husband from Toledo as well. But tell us kind of what's the pattern? How do people get to Columbus?
Well, there's definitely a pattern. I see Tony Bell over there because she's also from Youngstown, right? Yeah. Got all excited when you heard Youngstown. So from a show of hands real quick, how many of you were born and raised here in Central Ohio? How many were born and raised somewhere else in Ohio? And then what about somewhere else in the U.S.? If you weren't scanning the audience, this feels, by the way, it's the same response no matter where I go and ask that question. It's normally like a third, and a third, right, of where people are from. Not a lot of us are from here. In fact, Lark Mallory and I just had lunch the other day. She's from Warren, right? We represent, like, our family was working in the industry of Northeast Ohio. Mm-hmm. We came to Columbus and we've stayed, and now we are respective leaders in the things that we care about. So, funny story. As a kid, I loved cities and kind of wanted to be an architect, and then I realized I wasn't that good at math, so I should probably change my perspective on that. But I got the Ohio Almanac in 1980. I was 13 years old, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's this one place in Ohio that's growing. What makes Columbus so different than, say, Youngstown, right? And so I developed this childhood fascination with the city, and for my 16th birthday, I got to come to Columbus, right? My dad used to tell the story that I was able to tell the cab driver everywhere that I wanted to go because I'd studied the maps of the city for so long, right? And then in high school, I was so excited about the opportunity to move to Columbus, I wanted to write that article in the school newspaper, and there clearly was not a market for that. So I didn't get to write that article, but instead, I took an ad out in my high school newspaper advertising Columbus, right? And you can't make this stuff up. And for spring break, senior year, I organized a trip of people to come to Columbus. And every time Lisa Cordes tries to tell that story, she can't get through it. Look, she's giggling now. But it's true, right? Because Columbus, it felt like the Emerald City in the Wizard of Oz, right? It had a future, and neighborhoods are being revitalized, and there was a hopefulness. And that was very attractive to a young kid that was just starting to navigate the world around you, right? And it felt like I was leaving the old world, right, and coming to the new world. And so when you think about cities and their prosperity, there's push factors and pull factors. Ever since people lived in civilizations, right? What are push factors? War, famine, lack of opportunity. And what are pull factors? Well, openness, right? A welcomeness, economic and educational opportunity. And what is Columbus? It is those things, right? Young people move here from other parts of the state because it's an education town. People move here from across the world because there's economic opportunity. And those things are gifts that we have, but the future of those gifts is not insured, right? But I definitely represent that pattern, right? And any room that you're in, no matter where you are in this community, that survey, that third, a third, is gonna hold true no matter where you are. But there's no guarantee that that pattern of people who will look at Columbus as a place to be pulled to is not a given.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that. So before we kind of get deeper into the conversation about Columbus, I'm interested if we can kind of take it from the big picture. So lots of rich data every 2 years, 10 years, not 2, 10 years comes to us in the census. But I'm really curious, at a high level, what did the 2020 census tell us about Columbus, Franklin County, as it compares to the nation?
Yeah, so there's the decennial census. Recently, the 5-year American Community Survey data came out, which is, poverty and new Americans and other things. And then we recently, about a week ago, the 1-year estimates came out, and they were kind of bananas. I'm going to stick mainly with like the big picture, this bookend of 2010 and 2020. So Columbus is a city. We jumped Indianapolis and San Francisco, but Fort Worth jumped us, but we did move up one notch to become the 14th largest U.S. city, as I mentioned earlier. Growth in the United States slowed dramatically. In fact, there was about a 26% slowing of growth nationally. I think we went from like 9.7 to 7.6% as a country. It was the slowest growth in the United States since the 1930s. That trend was the opposite in Columbus and Franklin County, where the national level it slowed 26%, and in Franklin County and Columbus we saw a growth rate that was 50% higher than the previous decade. So we really bucked that national trend. The metropolitan growth of our region is about the same. For those of us that live and work in Franklin County, it feels like the metropolitan region is growing a lot more because what dramatically shifted in this decade was the growth of the metropolitan statistical area dramatically shifted inward to Franklin County. So in the previous census, just 46% of metro growth was in Franklin County. This decade, it was 70%, right? And that means there is nowhere in Franklin County that is really kind of untouched by what's growing in this region. Why is Franklin County the center of that growth? I believe it's because of the diversity of housing stock that's in Franklin County. If you think of Union and Delaware and Licking and Fairfield counties, those places are really zoned for single-family, larger homes on larger lots. That's not how we're growing, right? If you look at the diversity of how we're growing, we need smaller units, we need denser units, we need all kinds of variety of ways in which to live that match who we are as households and families and individuals. And that kind of housing stock is in Franklin County, and I think as we continue to change demographically, that growth is going to continue to come inward. And the other thing that happened, which I think is really important for us to reflect on, ever since the end of World War II, the number of people living in the American housing unit has been getting fewer and fewer, right? We have been building bigger and bigger houses for smaller and smaller households. That trend stopped and reversed itself in Columbus, and the 2020 census gave us the first confirmation what the nonprofit sector has been telling us, particularly all those folks working to keep people stable in their housing, try to avoid evictions, is that the number of people living in the Columbus typical housing unit actually went up because we've been chronically underbuilding housing to match our population growth. You know, the other thing that we saw across the country was the white population growth of the United States has really come to a slow rate, right? The white population is aging. Their majority are not in childbearing years. That also played out in Columbus. It was just a little bit more dramatic when you look at Franklin County relative to the rest of the country. So lots of things that we're kind of pulled up to, but Columbus is growing more quickly as the United States is slowing in its growth. And that's a testament to the attractiveness of this region.
Great. So let's dig into who's coming and really the diversity. I don't know if you all picked up on what Michael said and what Neil hinted at the beginning is a lot of the growth, the majority of the growth is from diverse backgrounds and populations. So let's talk about that. You know, we've been changing for some time now. I could say in my 20 years of Columbus, I definitely have seen that. But what did the census tell us about how we're changing in terms of our diversity? But then I'm really interested in what neighborhoods do you think are most impacted by these changes?
So one of the other pop quizzes I used to like to do before presentations, because nothing gets people more excited than census tract presentations, right? You got to make them interesting. I would put up a group A, Group B, Group C. What do you think are the largest new American communities in Franklin County? And like Group A would start with African, Group B would be Hispanic, and Group C would start with Asian. And so I would ask the audience, and normally you'd get a third, and a third. And then I knew exactly what side of town you lived on based on whether or not you picked Group A, Group B, and Group C. Because a lot of how we shape, you know, our understanding of things is based on where we live. I recently had the opportunity to talk to some architects, and they were shocked at the statistic that 100% of Franklin County and Columbus's growth is due to increases in diversity, because their opinion was that Columbus was just a mecca for white, young singles living in luxury buildings, these 5- and 6- and 7-story buildings we seem to be building a lot of right now. And I was like, well, maybe you're not driving down Sullivan Avenue, right, or Morse Road. So let's talk about Northland, right? Let's talk about the global diaspora. As of 2020, there were about 81 million people on the planet forcibly removed from their homes, and 23 million of them are refugees. What do you think that number has done in the last 24 months since the 2020 number was done? And Northland is really playing out as a destination of that global diaspora. And I'm going to oversimplify the trends. The white middle class picks up and moves out of cities. The black middle class has been picking up and moving out about 20 years later. And if you're Cleveland or Detroit or Youngstown, there's not a replacement population. So what are you left with? A lot of neighborhoods with empty real estate, empty commercial storefronts, and empty houses. Well, that's not here. And so in Northland, you can almost set your watch to what's happening. A local geographer from Ohio Wesleyan pulled every single business permit issued by the city of Columbus, issued in the 8 years after Northland Mall closed, and the vast majority of the new businesses on Morse Road were either African or Latino, right? The entrepreneurialism of Morse Road is much more than High Street in the Short North these days, right? And it happened where none of us were planning on it, right? And so it's a very different place. In Northland, there's about 9,000 people that are Asian. 10 years ago, it was 2,000, right? They're mostly Nepali Bhutanese. So if you look at the map of Franklin County, you can see we have the largest Asian community. It's growing at the fastest rate, but the Asian community near Ohio State is not the same that's near Dublin, and it's not the same that's in Northland. And it's actually not the same as the one that's in Reynoldsburg, right? So you're having these really interesting new American communities. And when you think about, what does that look like in the Columbus landscape, I reflect, United Way is a global brand. Let's say I had the opportunity to move to Mumbai because United Way is like booming in India, right? Well, if I don't know certain cultures, I'm not comfortable in certain environments, I'm probably going to move into a neighborhood with a lot of Westerners, right? Well, if I'm still living in Mumbai 10 years later, I'm probably going to be far more adventurous of where I choose to live in a city like Mumbai. Same thing's happening here. You look at the African community, you look at the Latino community, they generally will locate in a place that's comfortable. It's kind of segregation by comfort, right? But as those communities have been here now for a little while, they're becoming more diverse. And so when you look at the map of Franklin County, everywhere is more diverse. In fact, our diversity index went from 50 to 60, which is a measure of what's the likelihood of people who live in your neighborhood are going to be more diverse. That increase in diversity is happening in central city core neighborhoods. It's happening in suburban Columbus. It's happening in inner ring suburbs and along that suburban beltway as well. So lots of things to unpack, and I do believe that these demographic and diversity trends are here to stay, and the Columbus of 2030 is going to look very different than the one of today.
Right, excellent, excellent. So my next question is really a separate topic, but one that I think we're all curious about as we think about the growth of our community, and it's really about poverty. I think, you know, a lot of people would benefit from hearing your perspective, and really, let's define what poverty is, who's impacted by it, and what does the census tell us about racial disparity and poverty? Where is it currently? Where is it going? How is it moving? And what do you think it'll be like in 10 or 20 years?
All right, that was like 9 questions.
I know, all the
Okay.
things.
All right, take a picture of that. Poverty for a single person is $12,000 a year. It is a really low bar. If you make $13,000 a year as a single person in Franklin County, you're officially above the poverty level. What, right? It is an outdated bar. It's way too low. At United Way, we use 200% of federal poverty to determine eligibility for someone who's wanting to be served by a nonprofit. And there's a lot of people who qualify. The poverty rate is currently, based on the census, 15.4%. If you look at the last 50 years in Columbus, Franklin County, the poverty rate has gone from 10.6 to 18%. That's the movement, right? At 15.4%, it's too high. And that number, by the way, it's been stuck there for several years. That's not a COVID impact. That's where we've been for many years now in Franklin County, despite full employment, despite creating lots of jobs. Where it's moving is very predictable as well. Poverty is moving away from downtown. It is moving up Cleveland Avenue and Westerville Road, and it is moving east down Livingston, Broad, and Main, and it is an unstoppable juggernaut. We're also growing, so I just want you to process this, right? And by the way, poverty is really moving along the age of the housing stock, right? So where are the places that are most vulnerable? It's all the places in Franklin County built in like the 1950s through 1970s. They're not new enough to be competitive in the housing market. They're not old enough to be interesting for people who want to renovate. And that housing stock is starting to really show its age, right? And where are the new American communities? Northland, Eastland, Westland. They're following the availability of what is still a good housing stock, right? But it's not high priced. We're growing, and if the poverty rate and working poor, if those numbers just stay the same, we have 300,000 more economically vulnerable people coming between now and 2050. So my assignment to you, take out the map of Franklin County. I'll email you all the maps that show you where the geography of poverty was in 70, 80, 90, 2000, 2010, and now, right? And you'll see that very predictable pattern, right? It's also, by the way, moving out towards Hollywood Casino. Where do you want to put 300,000 more economically vulnerable people? And why is it that Columbus has to take the moral responsibility to house them all? We're a region. What about the unintended consequences of growth, right? 1 million more people, 300,000 of them will struggle, and those people are not going to Southern Delaware County, and they're not going to some of our really strong inner ring suburbs. They're going to be in Columbus. So as a Columbus booster, right, I'm really thankful we had an annexation policy. I'm really thankful that the city of Columbus is in 11 of the 16 school districts in Franklin County, because it gives Columbus this incredible opportunity to use its zoning code, right, to allow affordable housing to be in the Dublin School District. You drive down Bethel and Sawmill Roads, there are affordable housing projects on Sawmill Road in the Dublin School District, thanks to Columbus's annexation policies. Easton, Tuttle, Polaris, they're all in Columbus. I'm an urban advocate. Thank you, Polaris, for being in Columbus, right? Because it's helping the city's economic base, right, to have a AAA bond rating, to have the resources to do those things. Because the only way Columbus can invest in the Near East Side or Linden or Hilltop is because of that revenue that we're getting from places like Easton and Polaris. So, we have this really complicated geography, but it's actually working to our advantage. But I want to return. It's this unintended consequence of growth. And while we look at growth, where are we going to put people who struggle?
Very good. And I think, the point, and I have a couple more questions, and then I'll let you all join in the conversation, but I think the point, too, is that these people are coming here to work somewhere, so they also should live proximate to where they work. And I won't make this an urban planning lecture by any means of that, but I just wanted to note that as well. So let's think about kind of our region and the population, and I know United Way is very laser focused on young people and children and education. So our region is both a state and a national standout based on what you've shared with us today. And at a high level, we are a standout for educational attainment, given the presence of colleges and universities. But I'm curious, what does this look like through the lens of children in our community? And what kids are thriving, what kids are struggling? How does that align in the census data?
Yeah, so the census reported Franklin County, we now have the percent of adults that have a college degree is over 40%. It's huge, right? We're definitely a standout. But the sad reality is children who are born here are not really taking advantage of that K through 12 pipeline and then having access to institutions of higher learning. If you look at the economic census, which is done every 5 years, and we're kind of waiting for a new one, you look at income inequality or wealth inequality for young people, and if you look at the places that are the wealthiest, which tend to all be these inner ring suburbs, and those places that struggle, which all tend to be near Columbus's urban core, there's about a 70-to-1 ratio of kids, by the way, 15 to 24-year-olds, and the wealth that they have when they start out, there's about a 70-to-1 difference there. 40 years later, there's about a 240-to-1 difference in places of high wealth in Columbus and those that continue to struggle, meaning kids that are born in neighborhoods that struggle, kids that attend schools that are not meeting academic success, they don't look any different 40 years later, right? They've just not been able to take advantage of the prosperity of our region. 5 of the 8 wealthiest places in the state of Ohio are in Franklin County. 5 of the 8, and they're in order: New Albany, Powell, Dublin, UA, and Grandview. At United Way, we've been looking at student test scores. And you look at 3rd grade ELA, English Language Arts proficiency. And there's a clear pattern of both where kids were struggling and what's happened in the last 2 years. Those wealthy places I just mentioned, well, everybody, by the way, saw their academic achievement for children drop. But places like Grandview and Arlington and Bexley and Dublin and Powell and New Albany saw their academic achievement scores fall 2 to 8 percentage points. Columbus, Whitehall, Southwestern, even Gahanna and Westerville saw their academic achievements fall 20 to 30 percentage points in 2 years. And in every single Franklin County community, the racial disparity with educational attainment widened. 24 months ago, there was a 20-point spread between the academic achievement between white kids and black kids in the 3rd grade in Columbus. That's now a 25-point spread. But it gets even worse when I give you the actual numbers. 2 years ago, only 41% of black 3rd graders in Columbus were reading at grade level. 41%. 59% were not. Now only 16% of black 3rd graders are reading at grade level. We are failing a lot of kids. A lot of kids. And it's our legacy. I mean, one of the things I keep reflecting on over the last 2 years is, I just turned 55, right? I got a good decade left.
Of working.
As a friend of mine said, at this age, it's all hospice care. You're just managing the decline, right? Gravity's not my friend. Okay. Everything I care about, right? Everything I've cared about since I moved here 34 years ago has kind of gotten worse. And I don't want disparities to grow under my watch. I don't want to look back on my time in Columbus and say, God, what did I do? And, I don't want to be overly dramatic about it, but Hilton hotels and Eastons and soccer stadiums, they have their place, but they don't define us. What I think should define us is whether or not we've created an equitable environment for kids that are born here, and whether or not you're born in Linden or you're born in Grandview, you should be able to, go through a K-12 pipeline and be academically performing where you should be so you could take advantage of jobs at Intel. And that's not happening, right? And so we know these things, and it is a clear pattern, and I just wish we were more committed to it.
Thank you for that. I think the thing that sticks out to me is just really the passion and the thinking about the kids and all of us. I think many of us friends in the room, we do work that supports our communities and both in the business and the nonprofit sector. So what will be our legacy, I think, is a really good food for thought to think about as we dissect this data. So the next and the obvious thing we should think about really is housing, in my mind. And I think any of us casually observing, driving around our community, we see lots of construction happening. And, you know, we already live here. So we're like, who's going there? Who's going to move there? Who is all this new housing and construction for? And then especially when we see the pricing of the housing, which we won't go down that rabbit hole, but certainly we're curious. So I'm wondering, what do we learn about the housing situation in Central Ohio from the census data?
Yeah, so let's talk about housing and diversity first. Not diversity of housing, but diversity of people who occupy that housing. Every place in Franklin County is getting more diverse. Like when you look at the map, there's almost no census tract that is less diverse than what it was 10 years earlier. And yet we still have places that are kind of unchanged with regard to their homogeneity. So if you look at the 6 most homogeneous places in Franklin County, they are German Village, Clintonville, Grandview, Arlington, Old Worthington, and Bexley. There's something similar about all of them, even though 2 of them are in the city of Columbus, and 4 of them are in inner ring suburbs. 5 of the 6 were all places where redlining was deployed as it was deployed in every U.S. city, right? I don't want to guilt all of us into thinking that these were bad places. They're not. In fact, they're all politically aligned with how I would vote in the voting booth, right? But they look like 1920. They don't look like 2020, right? And so what is it about those places that they still look like the homogeneity of the policies that were put in place that prohibited lots of people from ever having access to those places? So while the laws have changed, the policies have changed, the practice is not, right? So that's number one we just need to acknowledge. Because when you look at Dublin and New Albany, which are homogeneous through the lens of economics, they're not homogeneous through the lens of race and culture. Dublin and New Albany represent a very different kind of suburban community. In fact, New Albany, a year ago, created an official NAACP chapter because 10% of the enrollment at New Albany High School is black, right? Why is it when black home buyers are looking at $750,000 million, $1.5 million homes, why are they not looking at those 6 places I just mentioned, right? Why are high-income black consumers going to New Albany and Gahanna and Pickerington, right? Is that history? Is that pattern? Is that a sense of welcomeness? That's number one. Number two is we are chronically underbuilding. Every year we build 5,000 units less than what we need just for that population growth. And if we really wanted to make up for the lost time of the previous decade, we should probably double the amount of construction that you see in this region. And the building that we're doing doesn't match the demographics of what we want, right? Think about people who are aging, people who want a smaller unit. That doesn't really exist. And what do builders, unfortunately, always have to build into? What the zoning code wants them to build. And so if you think of specific places, Northland, by the way, had the largest drop in vacant housing of any neighborhood in Franklin County, where 48% of all the vacant houses in Northland were absorbed in the last 10 years. Linden was second, 37% of all the vacant housing was absorbed, and the Near East Side was third, 34% of all the vacant housing in the Near East Side is now occupied. Across the county, we saw a huge reduction in vacant and abandoned housing. In fact, there's, I know the number, 9,417 less vacant houses than 10 years ago. By the time the 2020 census was done, we had a housing vacancy rate that was lower than San Francisco's. We have a problem, right? And at the same time, everybody's fighting density, right? As if somehow we live in a city of 1 million people and we don't want 5- and 6-story buildings, as if somehow they're bad, right? If we build in the next 30 years the way we have built in the last several decades, we'll lose about 700 square miles of farmland to low-density development, and that's not smart. That's not a smart city, right? We need to build around transit lines. We need to build walkable communities, right? We need to build neighborhoods where people have transportation choice. And if you're concerned about gentrification, if you're concerned about housing affordability, we have to stop the debate against apartments and stop the debate against high-density housing. We do not have a gentrification problem in Central Ohio. I just want to make that very clear. We have a displacement problem, right? If you look at the data, we have 10 times the number of neighborhoods getting poorer than experiencing gentrification. But everybody is experiencing housing displacement because our rents and our housing prices are jumping faster than our incomes. One of the core culprits is chronic underbuilding matching the population growth, and a house is where a job goes at night. And we're very, very good at attracting those jobs, and I want to thank everybody at the partnership for being good at their jobs. But we have to follow up with their strength of economic development, and we need to build more housing, and we have to change our attitudes about what that housing looks like, and we have to examine what role does history play with things like redlining and segregation, and how do those things still play out in 2022?
Wonderful. So we will move to questions from our live stream and in-person audiences in just about 30 seconds. So if you have a question, please make your way to the microphone in the back of the room now. Before we take audience questions, really just a final question, and maybe not in 30 seconds. I know you, Michael, but we'll try. I think we would be remiss to not talk about solutions, though. So I'm curious, what things do you feel we need to address in changing and the guiding of the future of our region? And I think all of us individually have a role to play, but then collectively, kind of what could we do?
So the last 2 years have been rough, right? And they've been really rough on the nonprofit sector. I think the Great Resignation is probably hurting nonprofits maybe more than any other issue that I've seen in the entire time I've worked in the sector. And yet, I could be really pessimistic about the future, and I am not. I am very excited and optimistic for the future that Columbus has, and there are 4 things that I think are really big things that we all have a role to play. We'll start with the easy ones, and then we'll go bigger picture. Source of income protection. Bexley was the first place in Central Ohio to approve a source of income protection, which means any legal source of income will now be used to qualify somebody for a housing unit. Columbus followed suit, so did Reynoldsburg, Whitehall, Worthington, and Westerville have also done the same. If you don't live in one of those communities, one of the most important and quickest things you can do is advocate for a source of income protection ordinance where you live, which basically says, I'm making a statement that my community is open for people who have other sources of income beyond a W-2. That's number one. Number two, I'll look at Columbus's rewriting its zoning code, right? It was done 70 years ago in an environment of segregation, right? All about the automobile and low density. It's been rewritten in every bit and piece, but it kind of needs thrown out and started over. And part of that zoning code needs to look at things like density and transportation, how we build a city. And I was thinking about this morning, and it reminded me of a story. When I was in grad school in city and regional planning, I had a colleague that was she was Chinese, Catholic, but was born and lived her entire life in India, and then comes to Columbus to study city and regional planning. And we're driving around Hilliard-Rome Road in Columbus, just north of 70, 1990s, and we're going through this condominium development, and it is just garage door after garage door after garage door. And there's this one unit where the garage door was open, and there was this woman sitting in a lawn chair, and she was like desperate for social interaction. And my friend Nancy Tan turns to me and she says, "Why does your government make people live this way?" And I was like, no, like people are choosing this. People are buying this. This is a market. And I was like, oh, people aren't choosing this. This is what people are forced. This is what our zoning code is forcing people to live like. Anti-human, not walkable, not mixed use, right? She's right. The zoning code really matters, and we need a new one. And if you don't live in the city of Columbus, you should probably look at your own community zoning code and say, is this encouraging change, right? Look at what Upper Arlington is doing on Lane Avenue and at Kingsdale. They're building a different city, right? Look at what Dublin did with Bridge Park, right? They're responding to changing demographics, right? So some of our suburban communities are really taking this issue head on. So zoning code. The other thing is the bond package. In 2019, We put $50 million in the Columbus bond package for affordable housing. We'd never done that before, right? What are bond packages? Well, they're roads and sidewalks and sewer lines. They're things that build a city. And all of a sudden now we're saying is, oh my gosh, affordable housing is just as important as streets and sidewalks, right? So now we have another bond package coming up, and they tripled the amount of money for affordable housing, $150 million. And if you want to talk about why affordable housing should be in a bond package, talk to Aaron Prosser, right? Our new leader of affordable housing strategies for Columbus. Well, Columbus shouldn't carry the burden of us moving from 2 million people to 3 million people. So what are suburban communities doing with their bond package to look at affordable housing? Are they taking their fair share? And then, the other one is Link Us with CODA. We have missed way too many opportunities in the 34 years I've lived here to build a different kind of city around a different kind of transportation, which is giving people transportation equity. Think about that, right? Do we treat the pedestrian, the bicyclist, the transit rider in the car with equity? Sidewalks are social justice. Riding the bus is social justice. And we shouldn't live in a city where there's just a stick along the gravel part of the berm of a road where someone has to stand unsheltered by the weather because they've chosen or they need to ride the bus. So Link Us, if you haven't gone to the website, if you haven't paid attention, if Link Us hasn't come to a community meeting, this is a multi-billion-dollar opportunity for us to reshape the urban geography of our region and move towards transportation justice. Not only, in my opinion, do you need to vote for that CODA levy, you need to do everything you can to advocate for it and push it, because it will reshape our urban geography so we don't lose those 700 square miles of some of the most productive farmland in the world unnecessarily to development. And then lastly, years ago I read the book Geography of Nowhere. And James Howard Kunstler, who is not an urbanist or urban planner and architect, he made this line of, if we do not build cities worthy of human affection, we will not have cities that people care about. It's hard to fight for a neighborhood that's just the closed Taco Bell and the big back store, right? Drive down Hamilton Road near Eastland. It's hard to fight for that space if you don't have an emotional connection to architecture, right? Or if you don't have the history of a neighborhood. So what do people do? If you don't have the tools to pick up and fight, or if you don't have the tools to stay, you pick up and go. It's that push and pull factor, right? It's why Columbus is growing and Cleveland is not. Push and pull factors, that's happening in our neighborhoods. But we have to start building a city worthy of human affection, because we will never have sunshine and warmth and mountains and water. And so if we don't build a city worthy of human affection, we're going to have a city that won't continue to have that pull factor 10 and 20 and 30 years from today.
Great. It's CMC's longstanding tradition to take audience questions. Doug Buchanan of CMC is curating questions from today's live stream audience. For our in-house audience, again, please join Doug at the microphone. Please keep your questions brief and to the point. Questions in a question mark. Doug, what is our first question?
I like that definition. Thank you, Autumn. And yes, please do join me at the microphone. If you would like to ask a question, we'll alternate between questions from the live stream audience and yours here in the room. So this is a terrific conversation. Thank you both. Our first question from one of our online audience members is, from the standpoint of the census, how is Black defined? Does the census data differentiate between Black respondents who are new Americans or immigrants and those who are not?
Great question. Our ideas and our definitions change over time, right? And so Hispanic is no longer a race, so you're either white alone, white Hispanic, white non-Hispanic, right? And so some of the challenges when we compare demographic data over time is that there is a greater understanding that people have of their own personal life journey, and maybe in previous census forms they would have indicated they were Black or they were white, and now they're identifying as some other race or two or more races, right? Specifically when it comes to Black, it is dependent upon how that person does interpret the question. And there were a lot of organizations in Central Ohio that worked very closely with new American communities to make sure they filled out that census. But there have been recent studies that have said, I think it was 18.8 million people of color were missed across the country who chose not to fill out that form. And if that undercounting is true, then even the population growth of Columbus was undercounted. So specifically, it is dependent upon how the person fills out the form, right? But if you are from Africa and you identify as Black, and not everybody from Africa is Black, right? It's how you filled out that form. So Black would be that first category, and then as you identify as New American falls into that other category. When I gave the statistics in my opening about the growth of Columbus, white population fell 0.4, the Black population's up 21%. Both white and Black will be inclusive of those New Americans, however they define their race. Did I answer that fully? Okay.
I'm Mindy Wright, and I think it's really funny that you didn't become an architect because you weren't good at math, because I think all you do is math. My question, I warned you about this, is maybe a little bit unfair. I'm interested in, I mean, the census was completed pretty much before COVID, right? So how did COVID deaths impact the general statistics you're talking about? I mean, if I think about what I heard during that whole time, that, you know, those who died tended to be people who were struggling, who were first-line responders, tended to be people who already had bad health conditions, tended to be people like me who are over 65. I took a point about that from what you said before.
She said that because I said that she looked really hip when I saw her when I walked in today.
Or people who made their own decisions about how they were going to behave. But given that we have that range of people and different reasons why people may have passed from COVID, how does that affect what we know now?
That's a great question. COVID. So let's look at the geography of Columbus. Huge population growth. The University District actually showed a population loss. If you know the University District around Ohio State, there's been thousands of new housing units. There's no way the Ohio State University District or the University District had a population loss, right? The census was being conducted shortly after the stay-at-home order. What's interesting, by the way, if you just think about OSU, the recorded population living in OSU dorms was up pretty significantly because OSU knows exactly where their students were supposed to be in April of 2020, and they got counted accurately, right? All those streets on Woodruff and 17th and over where I live in Wineland Park absolutely got undercounted. The other thing that we now know from the one-year estimates that came out for the period of 2020 to 2021, we really got to see the impact of what COVID has done to this country, and it was devastating. The United States population only grew 0.2% in that period. It was the slowest year of population growth ever recorded in the United States. Deaths were up, births were down, new Americans coming to the country disappeared, right? How do we grow? 50% of our growth is births minus deaths, 25% are people who come here from another country, and 25% are people who move from other parts of the country to Columbus. All of that was in jeopardy during COVID. I don't think the one-year estimates, which showed places like New York City Metro, like 375,000 people left Metro New York. I think San Francisco metropolitan region lost 250,000 people in 12 months. I think that's temporary, right? We actually did okay because while the 18 US states posted population loss in the one-year period from 20 to 2021. That's a COVID impact. That's never happened in the entire country of the United States to have 18 US states lose people. Ohio lost 10,000 people in a year, but Columbus gained 10,000 people, which means the rest of Ohio outside of Columbus lost 20,000 people. I think you're going to see some of that normalize, right? I think COVID accelerated the death rate. I don't know that COVID contributed to less babies because people were home a lot more. But there are all kinds of economic vulnerabilities that kind of played out, and lots of people who were getting jobs to Central Ohio didn't have to move to Central Ohio. So I think we'll start to see some of those trends normalize. So I don't know, did I fully answer all your stuff, Mindy? You know, she knows where to find me if she wants to follow up. Thank you.
You know, Michael, I have to tell you, I don't always come to these very infrequently, but we signed up yesterday for this. because we figure you doing your research and distilling all this information was worth a whole bunch more than $100 in lunches. So let me just say thank you so, so much for what you gave us here. I'm Denise Regg. I work for the Columbus Symphony. I'm much taken by this idea of a city worthy of human affection. I think that is so core to the problems related to, in a larger, broader sort of way. I mean, the people in Chicago are so proud to be Chicagoans. And you know, that blank stare you were talking about earlier, it doesn't just happen outside of our, outside of our community, it happens kind of inside of our community. So what does it really mean? Can you help us understand what it means to be a city worthy of human affection?
We are emotional creatures, right? And we live in civilizations because of that, right? One reaction is, why are places like German Village important? Not because we're all going to live there, because we feel good and we get rooted when we walk around a community that really represents a time period of U.S. history where we built great cities and they're walkable places. Why is downtown important, right? It is the civic and government and cultural hub of a region. What is one of the reasons why Columbus Foundation for a long time has been doing the Central Ohio benchmarking study, which really compares us to our peer cities. It's all those cities in that 1 million to 3 million range. And one of the things that we do excel, one of the things that we are truly #1 at, is the number of free festivals and events, right? Those are ways in which people connect, right? People move here and they're like, oh my God, I can go to ComFest and Festival Latino and, Jazz and Ribfest, and there's not an entrance fee, right? That's about building culture. That's about bringing people together, right? And we need to have cities where people can come, right, and share their identity and share their history and feel respected. At the core of the question for me is, do I feel welcome? Do I feel included? And do I get a seat at the table? We have one of the largest gay communities in the country, and we also have the largest Somali and Muslim communities. Those are two communities that don't hang out together, right? But why are they both attracted to Columbus? For the same reason, right? I feel respected. I feel welcome. I feel that I get a seat at a table. Now, that's not universally true, and I'm not naive, right, to say that there is equity at the seat of the table. But you look at the leadership of the city, very few people who are leaders are from here, right? But they've come here and they've been given opportunity. Mayor Coleman was from Toledo, right? Go through the list. I mean, it's the question that I asked in the beginning. Why did you come here? What has that experience been for you? And are we today creating a place and a seat at the table for someone who is different than me to have that seat? We will not have a racial majority in Franklin County at the end of the decade. Are there seats at the table for people to be invited and included? And do I feel that I have the tools to fight for a more just community? Or do I feel that those things are overwhelming that I want to pick up and leave? One of the beauties of Columbus is, in bad times, our metropolitan region will grow by 10%. In great times, we grow by 14%. We're not Charlotte or Austin, which is struggling with unmanageable growth, and we're not a community that busts and booms. We have this predictability with how we're going to perform. Are we using that predictability to our greatest advantage, and do people get a seat at the table? That's about creating a city worthy of human affection in my mind. In addition to building a city architecturally that looks good, right? Right?
So we're out of time, so we're going to turn it back over to Neil for concluding remarks. Thank you.
Well, I hope you found today's forum informative as much as I did. What we know is our region is changing, it's growing, and having a diversity, inclusion, and equity strategy is more important now than ever to respond to the increasingly diverse needs of our community. And so I know we all want to clap real quick because they did an awesome job. Thank you to our speakers. And I'm sure you all took something away that will help you have this important discussion in the organizations and communities in which you live in. And so we want to encourage you to make plans to join us next Wednesday for Columbus Restaurants, what's hot, what's new, and who's still thriving. So thank you today to our forum sponsors, the Robert Weiler Company, Regionomics. Thank you to our online virtual seat patrons and to the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation for presenting our live stream in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch. And our special appreciation again to today's speakers, Michael Wilkos and Autumn Glover. Thank you for joining us. We could not do this without each of you. And we look forward to seeing you next week for another community conversation. Thank you.